Sure thing. 안녕하세요, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's my pleasure to be here to present to you. I'm Chris Sotomayor with PERSOLKELLY, and the original description was webinar, but this is actually not a webinar because webinars are usually a one-way presentation. Today's session is very much going to be an interactive discussion. This is a workshop. So the aim is not so much that I will be lecturing to you, because I think all of you have had more than enough lectures in your life, and there's probably not much more I can give to you. Rather, I hope that the spirit of today as an interactive workshop is that we share with one another. The real value of today's session, there's that saying, 2 heads are better than 1. Well, in today's case, we may very well have 30 or more heads. So let's hope that we can all benefit from the collective wisdom and the collective experience of everyone who's joining today's session. So this session should last about 90 minutes, and I'm going to do everything in my power. So my role is a facilitator, but also a little bit of a timekeeper, because we are going to have lots of conversations, lots of discussions, and it's very easy for those conversations to run a little long, and I want to respect everybody's time. So we will keep this as close as possible to 90 minutes, but let's go ahead and begin. So thank you again for joining us. I do highly encourage everyone. The reason why we converted this from webinar to workshop is I want to see everybody's faces. So if you can turn on your camera, I'd love to be able to see you as I speak to you. And furthermore, since this is an interactive discussion, you don't have to wait. There's no designated Q&A time. If at any point I say something that catches your interest, or that you have something to contribute to our conversation, and it resonates with you and you'd like to share more perspective, please feel free. You can use the Zoom function to raise your hand. I have 2 monitors. So one monitor's got my slides, and the other monitor I can see all the participants, and I can also see the chat box. So for some of you, if you feel more comfortable, you can either raise your hand and I'll call on you, or if you like, you can just type directly into the chat box and you can put a question or a comment, and I'll read it out loud and I will share that with the group. So either way, this is a very interactive discussion. I'm seeking to learn just as much from you guys as I have things to share with you. And I'm very delighted to be here. And one last thing is, today is my birthday. So today is my life anniversary. So I'm honored to have this opportunity to spend a little bit of my life anniversary getting to know each and every one of you, and helping, hopefully, to bring some perspective on this crazy world, which we call the new normal. So thank you so much. Let's go ahead and begin. So just to clarify, today is a sample session. So normally we do a full half-day workshop on coping with the new normal. But today's session, we're just going to zero in on what is the new normal. If somebody wanted to participate in our full coping with the new normal, the second part would zero in a lot more on coping strategies. But we are going to talk about some great ways to adapt to the new normal today. But just want to put this in perspective. This is just a sample session of a larger program. And just to tell you a little bit, I'd be remiss if I didn't introduce PERSOLKELLY. So PERSOLKELLY is an HR and talent solutions company. Our focus is exclusively Asia Pacific. We serve 13 markets. We have 40 offices. We've been around for about 40 years, and we do a lot of talent placements. So we help our clients to recruit the talent they need, develop that talent, retain that talent. We try to provide solutions across the full spectrum, and our focus is exclusively on Asia Pacific. So it's my pleasure to represent PERSOLKELLY for you today. And just briefly to introduce me, so I'm a coach and a consultant. So the first 10 years of my life, I was in management consulting. I work here in Seoul for the McKinsey office. I work for Samsung Electronics. It's kind of an internal consultant. And then after the global financial crisis in 2008, I switched gears and I went into coaching. And I've been in coaching ever since. I love it. I've worked with thousands of clients from all over the world. I've worked for a couple of major business schools, including INSEAD and UNC Keenan-Flagler, and I currently teach classes at SKK GSB right here in Seoul. So love working with MBAs. I work with a full spectrum of clients ranging from MBAs up to the CEO level. So it's my pleasure to help people and facilitate their own solutions, their own transformations. And it's my pleasure to represent PERSOLKELLY and to present this session to you guys today. So thank you so much for joining us, and let's begin. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're first going to start by just defining what is the current reality and the aftermath of COVID-19. Then we're going to talk a little bit about dealing with grief and loss, because unfortunately, COVID-19 has introduced a lot of grief and loss, particularly lives lost, employment loss, and other losses. Then we're going to talk about dimensions of the new normal in the workplace. So how has this new normal transformed the world of work, and how can we adapt to that transformation? Then we'll touch on some of the unique challenges faced by people managers in this new normal, this new world of work. And finally, we'll wrap up with some of the discomforts that people have working from home or working in hybrid arrangements. But the whole idea is the world of work has changed, and it's really important for us to be able to adapt to it. I want to say up front, I do not have the answers. Rather, today is an interactive discussion to invite our participants to share their wisdom, to share their learning and their experience. And hopefully, by participating in such a conversation with one another, we all leave this session today with a little more wisdom about how some organizations are effectively dealing with the new normal or the new world of work. So let's start off by discussing, what is the new normal, or what, defining the new normal. And before I begin, I just want to say that I don't really know what the full background of everybody is. So one thing that might be helpful for those of you that do not know, you can go into your Zoom window, and if you right-click right on your face of your Zoom window, you can see rename. And I'd love to ask you to rename yourself so that you have both your name and your company, right? So in my case, I'll put PERSOLKELLY. But for many of you, I only see your name, but I don't know what organization you're with. So that would be, very helpful just to know when I see your name and I see your organization, and that way I can just understand a little bit more about what you might be doing. And, in an ideal situation, I would ask each and every one of you to take a few moments just to introduce yourself. But unfortunately, in a like with 30 participants, if we were to do that, it would take quite a bit of time. So we're going to hold off on that. But at the very least, we can see your name and your organization, and everybody else can see that as well. So I'd appreciate if you could do that. And now we're going to talk a little bit about what that new normal is, because people use that term a lot these days, like the new normal. Well, what is the new normal? Let's talk a little bit about what that is. So the first thing that I'd love to ask, and what we're going to do for the next few moments, we're going to have an interactive discussion. So I'm going to ask you guys to raise your hand or type into the chat box. So Elizabeth you just mentioned she tried to right click, but there was no option to change the description. So what should happen is if you right click on your picture, there should be an option to rename down at the bottom. I hope that you all have access to that. It's just you rename yourself. And Elizabeth is saying she cannot see that. So I'm wondering if that's, I saw that several people were able to change their name, but maybe some people are not. So we'll hold off on that for now. We'll come back to it. But, if there's anybody who's wanting to speak and they don't have their company name, I'll ask you just to briefly mention your company name if we can't see it. But the first interactive question that I want to put to this group is, based upon your own experiences, your own perspective, which jobs, job roles, or organizational activities do you see as being affected the most during the past couple of years of COVID? And I know that sometimes people are a little shy to volunteer. So initially, I may do a little bit of cold calling, but you also are welcome to raise your hand. So the first question again is, where have you seen job roles or organizational activities? Where have you seen the most change or the most effect during the past couple of years of COVID? And Robert was just mentioning leadership. Robert, would you care to share a little bit about like what aspects of leadership you're seeing be affected most?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Chris?
we can hear you. Yes.
Okay, great. Well, in my perspective, definitely a lot of companies, having this work from home policy for quite an extended period. So now the traditional way of the management, people management, is not, they're working anymore. So you still have to manage and control your work in a remote, condition. So the way you manage your team, now the landscape is totally different. So it's a bit of a challenge for all the, people in the leadership, people management, role.
Absolutely, Robert. I've talked to many leaders who have mentioned that it's been, a big change to adapt the way that they lead their team. They were so used to being able to see their teammates or meet with them. And now, they may not see their teammates face to face for months. So it definitely, changes things if you're used to working right next to somebody and suddenly you're only working remotely. As a leader, it can definitely be a challenge. And I would just love to hear, Robert, if you have found anything helpful, like, if you've been leading a team and that team has been working from home, have you found some helpful things that that made it a little bit better, or made it a little easier to make that change?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a tough question, but one thing I'm very sure is employees are very much happy about the work from home by now. Well, in the beginning, definitely they find it a little bit difficult to work from home. I mean, because they don't have all the the equipments at their home. But after a few months, they really get used to the this new environment, and they feel that they can manage their works even at home. So I think that's more as a challenge because after having this work from home more than a year, a lot of employees, particularly the junior level, they are reluctant to come back to office because they say, yes, we can do the work at home. So
there is something to be said there. You are raising a very important issue, Robert, and we are hearing in some markets, as employers start asking their workforces to return to the office a little bit more, you are starting to hear a lot of pushback because many employees are much happier working from home, and they feel like going back to working in the office would not necessarily be an improvement. But we're going to touch on that subject quite a bit more. Maybe I can ask some other people to share any perspective about big changes that they saw in their organization in terms of the work that's being done during COVID. So for example, if I can randomly choose somebody, how about Yoonju Cho? Yoonju, care to share with us any perspective about things in your organization that might have been impacted by COVID? And I know some of you, you may be not able to turn on your camera, but you just let me know if you're unable to speak or unable to turn on your camera. So at the beginning, I'll do a little bit of mixing cold call as well as asking people to volunteer, because I know that sometimes introverts, they're not going to volunteer, but they still have a lot of valuable perspective to share. Are you able to hear me, Yunjo? Cho Yunjo?
Hello. Hi. Yes, I
yes.
can hear you. Yes. So yes, this is quite interesting subject nowadays. As since the beginning of the COVID-19, it was quite the crisis situation, even for the management. So taking this working from home from the beginning and up to now, almost 3 years in Korea, even Korea also, because we started to take this scheme very early moment of the outbreak in Korea. So even management side, actually, as a human being, and we are used to communicate virtually, phoning. So I think there is a lot of the advantage in terms of the working environment and the communication way. Yes, we have to. There is many things to be improved continuously, but because it's because of working from home, I don't think so. Just in general term, the generally in terms of the communication, in terms of the working quality improvement. So we have to continue to be improved. However, the working from home is one of the new scheme of working way as a new normal. New normal, yes, this is during the COVID-19, we learned that we can work virtually, we can work at home as well. So this is a new acknowledgement during this pandemic period worldwide. So I think this is a good learning. And then now how we can take the kind of working scheme hybridly, if it's possible. So this is depends on the industry. So not every site and not every industry, I don't think so. So this is, from my point of view, this is one thing we learned positively and we can digest newly.
Well, definitely. And the aim of today is to touch on a lot of the ways that the new normal has sort of changed the way that we work and the way we will work moving forward into the future. Thank you so much for sharing that. By the way, I don't see your company. So, Yunjo, which organization are you with?
Rural Logistics, French company.
Now, Vanessa, you mentioned that you work for a school and teachers have been majorly impacted. Care to share just a little bit about your experience of adapting to teaching during COVID?
Hi, I cannot put my video on because I'm sharing my room with several people. Yes. So yes, I mean, COVID has definitely impacted teaching in general. So we have adapted new technologies, which I think is great because it really, I mean, it's a process that had started, but now it has been accelerated. And it has made us more flexible in a way, because we've had to move from being online to being face-to-face. And then going back and forth. So I think we've gained a lot of agility thanks to COVID, if you want to.
So I always wonder if the students, I guess there's some advantages and disadvantages from remote learning versus in-class learning.
Absolutely. So I think our students have also matured during this period. They've become more independent, which is not a bad skill to develop. But at the same time, we're happy to have them face-to-face at school because there's a whole social component to learning and being part of a school. I'm not talking about university, but I'm talking here about children that are from 3 years old to 18 years old. And definitely remote learning cannot compensate for the face-to-face interactions, even though kids today are in Discord and in their own social media platforms, and they're very active.
So I did a little bit of teaching of some children in Korea during my time. And I guess one thing that virtual learning has as an advantage is there's no possibility of little kids giving you a dongjim when you are only teaching them virtually. So that was a very surprise. I don't know if that ever happened to you, but that was quite a surprising thing when that happened to me some years ago.
No, I'm actually the director of marketing and communications here. So,
okay.
And a little bit different role. So I'm only talking about what I have observed in my organization.
Understood. So Elizabeth, you're mentioning that team building activities have been impacted, meetings. Care to share just a little bit about that?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Elizabeth. I'm sorry, I can't figure out how to put my company's name on my thing. So I work for a firm here, BKL. I mean, for me personally, and from what I hear from many of my clients, obviously, because of the COVID situation, there's been a lot of impact on how we do meetings. You know, I've been in Korea for about 20 years now, and it's always been face-to-face meetings, whether it's internal collaboration with other colleagues or meeting clients or whatnot. It's always sort of face-to-face activities, and obviously that's been put on hold. And so now everybody's had to adapt to this, Zoom world that we live in. So that has changed quite a bit in terms of how people interact. You no longer get that, go down the hall to knock on your neighbor's door to, collaborate on a whim or anything. So, and also team building, in Korea, the culture is everybody's got to get together. You got to do some drinking. You got to do some, commiserating about, things that are going on throughout the day. But you do that sort of, over drinks or over dinner. And obviously we haven't been able to do that. So those sort of things have been quite a challenge to adapt to. And, I hear the same thing from clients as well.
Well, the good news is, at least a few days ago, I was walking through Cheongno and I saw a lot of people sitting down and enjoying themselves outside at a pachongmacha, and they seemed just like the old days. So maybe that aspect of Korea might be coming back soon, but
Fingers
definitely
crossed.
a challenge.
Fingers crossed.
A challenge if you got used to doing that and suddenly you couldn't do it for 2 or 3 years.
Right.
Definitely. Thank you so much. So we'll move on to the next question. So even before COVID, workplaces have been going through some transformations and workplace trends have been taking place. Just love to ask you guys a few questions. What are the top 3 workplace trends, changes in the workplace, and where technology, the hint is technology has been driving some of these changes? So would love to hear, what are you seeing are some of the biggest workplace trends that are changing, especially as impacted by technology? And I may do a little bit of cold calling. So, Bonnie, you say mobile office, shared office. Care to talk just a little bit about that?
Yes,
Shared
so
office. Tell me a little bit more about that.
now we have, with the help of technology, we don't actually need an actual space for each and every one. So I can see that many offices have shrink their size because the land, the payment to the landlord is quite high in Seoul. So they make a smaller office and make a existing places to mobile office or shared office, so that they can save the money to the landlord, and yes, to be more flexible. I can see the trend is coming and also happening.
Definitely. As a matter of fact, before coming back to Korea last year in March, I was living in the New York City area, and I just happened to see about New York City, where even as of now, only about 10% of workers are going to their office on a regular basis in Manhattan. So that means 90% of the people are still either working from home or not really going to their office full time. So, in a city like New York, similar to a city like Seoul, leases are very expensive. If organizations are not having their workers come to the office, what's the point of paying for a very expensive lease? So it's a good opportunity potentially to reduce your real estate footprint and lower your cost. And who knows what's going to happen in the future, right? Because I'm loving seeing, I just saw on the news that I think Korea has, very, very low COVID infections. And I hope it keeps on as a trend, but we don't know what's going to happen this winter. And if numbers suddenly start jumping up like they did last year, we don't know what's going to happen. So even being able to predict what's going to happen in the future could be a little tough in terms of office leases. But that's a very good sharing, Bomi. Thank you so much. And maybe I can ask Seun Kim, have you seen any workplace trends impacted by technology? Can you hear me, Kim Seun? And hopefully I'm saying that properly. I may misspeak sometimes. So I'll do a mix of cold calling and seeing the people who volunteer. Maybe we'll come back and give you another chance later, Seun. As some people have been mentioning in the chat, clearly remote work and what we're doing right now. So using video conferencing, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, WebEx, all of those platforms, that's something that we're seeing just a lot more. It's always been there. WebEx has been around for many, many, many years, but the frequency that we do it, what we take for granted on our day-to-day work, it seems like that kind of remote work where you're using platforms like Zoom or like Teams to be able to work with your distributed workforce, much, much, much more common. And virtual co-work. So I think that's, again, separate platforms where you're not working together, but thanks to things like Teams, you're able to actually work together, even though you might be on the other side of the planet from one another. So all of those things are good. We're going to talk about more of this, but I want to be mindful of time. So we're going to go on to which occupations, so which kinds of jobs have we seen the most demand for during COVID, and which other types of jobs have we seen much less demand for? I'd love to hear your perspective about which kind of jobs or occupations are we seeing a lot more demand for in the new normal or the era of COVID. And as Vanessa mentioned in the chat, another big trend is on personal well-being. Definitely. So maybe I can ask Hankyo Lee.
Hi. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good question. I think we are consultants, and we do mostly our working clients, related projects. So I think in this day and age, dealing with clients remotely is a very specialized skill. Before COVID, you were able to visit their offices and have these personal interactions, but nowadays there is no limits to what kinds of clients you can get in foreign countries even. So people who are able to adapt in this kind of environment and be able to do client work with time, I think that is a very desirable skill.
Very good. And it may well be the case that if you're used to working more face-to-face your entire career, and now there's very, very little face-to-face, and you're doing most of your work using remote work platforms or virtual work platforms, it could be a big challenge, and it could be a big change. And some people are more effective face-to-face, and some people are, less effective on video, right? So
For sure.
Definitely. Have you been able to, would you say that you've been able to, would you say the people on your team have been easily able to make that transition?
It's hard to say. I joined after COVID started, but
Okay.
But our firm has more than 10 years ago because we have global offices, and many of our team members, especially in Finland, they also work in with global clients. So we haven't been affected as much as perhaps other consulting firms. Having implemented this Teams meetings and remote working environment and flexible hours has been very helpful.
Very good. Any other perspective on occupations where you're seeing a lot more demand in the market, or occupations you're seeing a lot less demand in the market? How about Dean Johnson? Has your organization seen, a switch up in what you're looking for in the COVID era?
Hi, everybody. So my name's Dean. So I work at Skyline Luge Busan. So we're a tourist attraction. So we've noticed a massive difference or change, I guess, with our business here with coming out of COVID. Obviously, COVID, you had circuit breakers or lockdowns, capacity restrictions, safe management measures. So the whole demand, or I guess, of our guests were not coming out and enjoying our tourist attraction or other tourist attractions. So the major change we've noticed is a huge demand for labour. That's, people greeting, people clipping tickets, not just for tourism as well, but also for the hospitality sector, the food and beverage sector as well. Now that we're coming into a new norm, there's going to be a massive demand for that, I guess, front of house, even back of house staffing.
So I think I saw some articles saying that, certain hospitality organizations were now trying to restaff because they had to, let go of a lot of people during COVID, but they're having a hard time. Just curious, Dean, do you have some perspective on that? Or are you, is your organization successfully being able to find the people you need?
Well, our site here opened up during COVID world. So we opened up on the 3rd of July last year. So our staffing reflected the current sort of COVID levels, and we've been slowly building as we go. But the whole enterprise Skyline, which is New Zealand, Canada, Singapore, we obviously had some effects due to staffing, but we did a lot of cross-skilling, cross-training, a lot of hybrid work as well to ensure that we kept the staff knowing that once COVID came to an end, or we could see the end of the light at the end of a tunnel, we had all those skilled workers that we could utilise and continue working for this current day or moving forward.
Much for sharing, Dean. So it's clear, job roles, activities have been affected, workplace trends especially impacts from technology, have been accelerated because of COVID, and we're seeing a change in occupation. Now, all of these questions sort of set us up. I just want to share a little bit of a summary of some research done by McKinsey. So McKinsey looked at the organizations and the industries that were most affected by COVID. And so the answer to the first question of where do you see the most impact on occupational or organizational activities, the answer I want to take a look at here. So let me turn on my laser pointer. Oops. And just point this out. So what McKinsey has done here is they've divided work into what they call high physical proximity versus low physical proximity. So high physical proximity means when you're working closely with your customer, or when you're working closely with clients. And what McKinsey found is that all of the industries where that kind of work was being done, those were the industries that were the most affected by COVID. So clearly, if you are working in the medical care industry, if you are a nurse or a doctor, your working with patients dramatically changed because you have healthcare workers that were donning full hazmat suits, and they were wearing those hazmat suits sometimes 19 hours a day, being very careful about the way they interacted with patients. There was a huge change in the way that they did their work. And that's still going on now, although, the alarm level and the concern about COVID is, dramatically fallen around the world, but there was a huge change there. Then any kind of personal care, whether that be, silver care, taking care of customers, especially if you had a lot of face-to-face interaction, that was definitely impacted by COVID. On-site customer interaction, right? You couldn't necessarily meet with your customers. You couldn't have your customers come. So obviously in leisure and travel and hospitality, restaurants, you had restrictions, sometimes forced to be shut down. Sometimes there were curfews. Right here in Korea, places had to close at 9 p.m. The number of people that could gather, very much limited. So all of that work was badly affected. Now, as you start moving further away from high physical proximity, so low physical proximity means you're not really physically interacting with your customers that much, the impact was not as severe. So for example, computer-based office work, you may have been used to doing it at your office, but you could adapt and you could do that computer-based work at home as long as you had a computer at home and some place to work. Classroom and training, as Vanessa had shared earlier, there has been a big change in classroom and training, but still, schools still operated. Universities and colleges still operated. They just switched from in-person classes to remote learning. Then you have transportation. Clearly, during the era of COVID, we couldn't really survive without the ability to order from sites like Amazon or Coupang or other sites. So you have the transportation of goods, which was still thankfully very active. And then sort of outdoor jobs were not as impacted as badly. They were impacted, but not as badly as, say, high physical proximity. So that's the answer to the first question. The answer to the second question, what are the major trends that we saw during COVID? And some of these trends were already in place before COVID, but COVID very much accelerated them. And the first is remote work. So 20 to 25% of workers in advanced economies worked remotely even more than 3 days a week. Then we see digitization. So, 2 to 5x growth in e-commerce, surge in digital platforms, all of that vastly accelerated by COVID, and then automation. So a lot more, if you can't rely on people, or if there are restrictions on people traveling or people coming to work or meeting with customers, then there was a turn to a lot more automation, robotics, AI, et cetera. So those are the big trends. And then the answer to the final question, where was the most growth in labor, where was the most change in labor demand? Just according to this McKinsey research, the most growth was in health, clearly huge demand for health aides, et cetera. and health professionals, and growth in STEM workers. So definitely, if you have sons and daughters going to university, it's probably a good idea to encourage them to major in STEM related subjects if they want to have a better chance of finding good jobs. When I was in college, I majored in philosophy, and it was very difficult for me to get a job way before COVID. And then we see a big fall in office support type jobs, customer service jobs, clearly, especially if you're a server working at a restaurant, or if you're doing face-to-face customer interaction. You can't do that during COVID. And so these were some of the major changes. So this is just sort of the aftermath of the COVID restrictions, this new normal. And now I just want to move on just a little bit. We're going to talk about dealing with some grief and loss. So clearly, you can see the numbers. Lots and lots of people encountered an unexpected loss of a loved one or somebody that was close to them. And it's one thing when it's in your own personal life, but also when you're working with somebody else, or if you're a people leader and you're leading others, and you see them sort of struggling to adapt to the loss of a loved one, of somebody very close. So I'd love to just pause for a moment and throw it out. Where have you found, and has anybody found an effective way, or a better way, especially if you're leading others or working with others? If you see them going through this loss, have you found any kind of good way to be a support or to encourage them? So Vanessa was just mentioning at this, I believe at the school she's working at, they have in-house psychologists and counselors, and she just mentioned very busy. So I can imagine that kind of role would be, very, very, very challenging. Vanessa, do you want to share anything about how that's been helpful to either students or staff at your school?
I think it's just the fact that people know there was a place for them to go to a safe space to express their feelings and their emotions. I think probably that is the biggest added value of a person with such a role. Because to go back to your current question, have you found any way to support it? It's very difficult to do that. But just being there and showing compassion.
The showing compassion, I think that's a very important part. I don't know if there's any one solution, but definitely being able to get in touch with our empathetic side is probably, a better approach during this time. But again, I'd love to hear from anybody who's a people leader. If any of your staff had to deal with any kind of loss of life, if you found any good suggestions for how to approach your staff.
Chris, this is Robert again.
Sure, Robert.
Well, actually, I don't think there's any big issue for the grief and loss. The company from the beginning has provided a lot of support for the the employees. Starting from the work from home, the mask, healthcare, a lot of supports, right? And as you understand, the Korea, the fatality, the ratio is very low. So employees are mostly very young, and even they got infected by the COVID, they sick for a few weeks and they get easily recover. So I think the issue now is more about the how to cope with this new normal, because like a leadership team, the employees are also a bit of worried about what this new normal means for them. Does it mean that they should come back to work as before, or should have the after hour dinner or drink like before? I mean, all this kind of because of the COVID situation has been quite a long. It's more than like 2 years by now. So they have been very much accustomed to this COVID situation, COVID way of working, and now we have to go back. But the new normal wouldn't be the same as the before. So they are also very much the cautious and afraid of what the new normal means to them. I think that's bigger challenge for me.
You're absolutely 100% on the mark there, Robert. That's the aim of today. I did want to just pause for a moment. There are people who may have lost loved ones. The other situation is many people know somebody who may have been impacted by loss of employment as well. And this is especially the case for people that might have been working in the hospitality or the travel industry or the leisure industries, where, restaurants were at limited capacity. You couldn't really fly to other countries very easily. Lots of things happened so that there was a disruption. Some people, lost employment for a while. And, I've heard some stories where sometimes there was a silver lining in the cloud. Some people even found better jobs. But I'd love to hear it if anybody was able to share any encouragement for anybody who may have, lost their job and was looking for a new position during COVID, which was not easy either, because during COVID, your interviews were mostly virtual. You couldn't meet face to face. Over a camera is a little bit different than meeting with somebody face to face. So I'd love to hear if anybody had any good suggestions for how they encourage their colleagues or friends who might have been impacted by their employers reducing their work during COVID. Well, I'm actually going to speed up just a little bit because I want to move on to some of the other things. But the last thing I wanted to mention is many organizations and the people within those organizations have been struggling with loss of organizational resources during COVID. One of those things is materials. So some supplier relationships were majorly disrupted during COVID. Other organizations, if you were very used to working in an office and now suddenly you no longer work in an office, you're just working from home. But if you were, as somebody mentioned right at the beginning of our discussion today, if you were a leader used to managing your people by seeing them every day and suddenly you're not seeing them, your leadership role has changed a lot. And that's kind of a loss from what you were used to. And then there are some organizations where they had to lose some people as a result of COVID restrictions, et cetera. And other losses. So what we see in terms of loss is there has been some loss of life. Thank God in Korea, the loss of life has been much more limited than in some other countries. Employment definitely was lost by some people, and organizations have been, lost some of the structure, lost some of the resources that had been taken for granted before COVID. And now in the new normal, as Robert just mentioned before, the real question is, how do we adapt to them? And that's what the next part of this presentation will be, discussing how we adapt. So the first thing I want to talk about is, how do we adapt to working with our other internal stakeholders during this new normal? And once again, I want to reiterate, I do not have a silver bullet, or I do not have a bunch of canned solutions to offer to you. This is a conversation where hopefully we can share and learn from one another what might have worked. But just to briefly set it up, during COVID, stakeholder expectations have changed quite a bit. I've heard from certain organizations where the expectation from your other stakeholders in the organization didn't used to change as frequently, but now it seems like the frequency that the expectations are changing has really accelerated. And so part of that risk of miscommunication. When you're all working together in the same office, it's easy to grab somebody, go into a conference room. But when you're distributed, right, and there's synchronous work where you're all working together at the same time, but when you're working from home, your work may be asynchronous. One person may be working in the morning, one person may be working at night. You're not necessarily working at the same exact time. So coordinating those expectations from different stakeholders in your organization can be a little hard. And so there seems to be a little more emphasis on trying to get some written agreement or written, like, what is the expectation? And then setting expectations, having conversations to set expectations. So in the past, it used to be your manager could just grab you and pull you into a conference room, and you could have an impromptu 1 hour or 90-minute or sometimes 2-hour meeting to discuss something. Well, now that's a lot harder. And the suggestion that's been made is that more effective approaches are what are called 20-minute power chats. And instead of having like a 1 hour or 2-hour meeting, you have like a 20-minute power chat with somebody, you know, set expectations for a day or a few days or a project. Then you're regularly touching base. You might have the same power chat, you know, once in the morning, once in the evening, or once in the afternoon one day, in the morning the next day. But these sort of brief power chats seem to be a little more effective. What makes effective feedback is that it's timely, right? You get the feedback when you need it right away, not 1 year or 2 weeks later. It's based on fact or real observation of what you've done. If there's behavior that needs to be changed, if your manager wants you to do something different, it's got to be doable or implementable. Somebody's giving you feedback where you can make a change. And then, you know, the feedback is sort of continuous because nobody's perfect and we can always improve. But so what I'd love to do now is just pause and turn it over to our collective wisdom. What kind of things have you found that makes it, you know, managing internal stakeholders or the other people in your organization where you're working separately? What kind of things have you found that's made it a little bit better?
Hi, I'm just going to step in.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I'm one of those extroverts, I guess. What I found really useful is that I used to have meetings with maybe 5-6 people, and we had a close, a big team meeting, and to go to work physically and be together, I started to have one-to-ones with them, not every day, but maybe every 2 days. So 3 one day, 3 the other day. And I found that it actually brought us together more closely, and I got to know them better. So that when we went back to face-to-face and we were all together, actually the way that we communicated had changed. The conversations were more honest and more open.
So that's wonderful. You were able to use that one-to-one sort of, I guess, virtual meetings.
Yes.
And it still strengthened your overall working relationship. So that sort of supports this idea that these, small power chats could be more effective, particularly when you're working with a distributed group.
Yeah, I think 20 minutes is too much. Mine were more like 10 minutes. quite straight to the point, because we were, we started using more what was mentioned before. In our case, is Google Drive and Google Documents, so we could already see each other's work. So
Okay.
we were more collaborative in that way, that when we would meet, we could get straight to what needed to be addressed personally.
Fantastic. That's a positive success story. Maybe I can ask some other of our participants. So for example, if I can ask Juan Lee, have you found anything, helpful in terms of working with other members of your team while in this new normal? Can you hear me? And maybe I'm saying it wrong. Is it June or Juan Lee? So she may have stepped away.
No, you mean me,
Okay.
Julie?
Yes, yes.
Yes, actually, I'm working at the Denmark company. Before even COVID, we had a very, common practice regarding wherever you work, flexibility. So for
Oh.
us, this is not new, but for Korean staffs who did a local hire like me, it's very new. The good thing is we can use some flexibility at work and also time difference without access. Since all the meeting weekly basis, we don't use Zoom, but in MS Teams basis. So this is like a daily life now.
So a lot of people have found the new normal when you are working asynchronously, particularly if you do have a global organization. So if you have members of your team in Europe, members of your team in North America, members of your team in Asia, and you are, working in different time zones. For some people, they're happy to do that. For other people, sometimes you'll hear a comment like, I feel like there's no end to my work because I'm working 24 hours a day. And some people have felt a little bit like overwhelmed because they don't know when to stop working, but other people are very comfortable with it. So I think it depends on the person, but I'm very glad to hear that most of the organizations seem to be quite effective at being able to work, asynchronously or with people at different parts of the world in different times. The key again is, there's no silver bullet, but when you're working with different people, some kind of an agreement about what is expectation, like how timely should you respond, and what kind of response should you have, and how quickly do you need to get back to somebody, those kind of things. And how, if your customer is contacting you, how quickly do you need to get back to that customer? And, if your customer is in another part of the world and they're sending you an email and it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, your time, should you respond to that email right away, or should you, wait and respond in the morning? Like all of these kind of expectations, it's probably good to get some sort of understanding of, what is expected. And that way there's no miscommunication, because that's the one thing that we're seeing a lot more of, miscommunication, as people are working more distributed. So that leads me to the aspect of relationships with customers. So in the new normal, one of the big changes or challenges has been pleasing customers when customer expectations have changed a lot. So new touch points and new interfaces with customers have become a lot more common. Some customers and this is more in the B to C space than necessarily the B to B space, but some customers, they didn't want to have to leave their home. They want everything to be delivered right to their doorstep. And so sometimes this requires change in the way that you work with customers. So for example, in the aspect of real estate, it used to be very much the case that you would go to if you wanted to buy a house or rent a new apartment, you would go to the place and you would walk around and you would physically see it and tour it and then make a decision. But, in the era of COVID, that couldn't really happen. So you had a lot of virtual platforms or virtual solutions to try to help people to, virtually see a home or virtually see an apartment, or even sometimes in buying an automobile, you couldn't meet a salesperson, but you might virtually see what the interior of a car might be like before you're necessarily going to buy it. Now, one thing that's definitely changed is that in the older days, when a customer was unhappy about their experience, they might call your customer service number and complain, and they might go on a forum and write something. But now what's probably much more likely to happen, if a customer has a negative experience with a company, they're very, it's much more common. They're going to go right to a platform like Instagram or Facebook or some other social media site, and they're right away going to start describing their negative experience. And sometimes when they share that kind of post, it gets a lot of upvotes from other people, and the post can even become viral. So before somebody has a chance to repair their reputation, a business might be damaged. Their reputation could be damaged. So I'd love to hear from this group, what have been some of the better ways that you have found in your organization to maintain healthy, good relationships with customers in this new normal? And maybe I can ask, I see the HY in the participant list, but I'm not sure what organization you're with. HY, are you with us?
Yes, I work for a French company.
Okay.
Just initial mind of new normal is that it's gonna be forever from now on, or just temporary situation during COVID or after COVID, that we gonna keep that the new normal or not. That's the one thing that I mind. I'm thinking about the PERSOLKELLY. It's a new delivery system provider to home, and then every housewife ordered the product and they delivered that. That's the quite innovative situation these days. And by the way, the delivery coupon were the Baemin.com, they increased their demand last year, but I heard that some decrease again, because people are going out for dinners and beers, right? And I'm not sure how their business model will keep going and coupon, but I think they find some solution after the COVID.
So I think I also heard that some of the delivery companies their fees are considered to be a little bit high. So some customers are a little price sensitive, and they feel like, now it's better to actually go to a restaurant and sit down and eat with your friend instead of, necessarily ordering delivery, particularly if there's, a big price difference. So
Yeah,
that's
right.
one
Yeah.
thing.
I heard that there's a Baemin one services direct model without stopping the other houses and they make a shortened time for delivery. And as you said, there's people are going out for hang out for dinners and beers. So there should be industry change in the part.
Well, definitely. So just curious if you have any, if you've seen, if you know of, or you have encountered some really good ways that companies are keeping good relationships with their customers in this sort of new normal.
Well, in terms of the customer contact and gathering feedback from their experiences, and these days we are focusing on more customer experience. So I recommend you to increase or embrace the customer experience comment. It may be a mail or chatting or web, whatever the medium.
So I think that's something that's a very good point you just raised. Allowing your customers, showing your customers that you are listening to them, that you are hearing that feedback, whether that feedback be positive or maybe even if that feedback sometimes is negative. I think that's important.
That's right. That's correct.
And I'd be curious to know from others if you see great ways of managing customer relationships during this new normal. One interesting story I heard was from my Indian colleague. He said his whole life he's always gone to a barber shop to get his hair cut. But he said that in India recently, thanks to apps, he doesn't even have to go to a barber shop. He can order through his app, and a haircut person will come directly to his house. And when the haircut person comes to cut his hair, the haircut person comes with this big mat. So they put down the mat, the person sits on the chair, gets his hair cut, the hair falls on the mat, and the person comes with a vacuum, and they vacuum up all the hair and clean up all the mess so that the person doesn't even have to go to a barber shop and doesn't have to worry about cleaning up the mess of the hair. I mean, he can get everything done right from his home. And he said he was really, really happy with the experience, and the price was not much higher than his normal price of he said actually it wasn't higher at all from his normal price of going to a barbershop. And he said it was a great experience. So, it may be the case that bringing customer service right to somebody's door may be something that's there may be more aspects to that. And this is an area where those companies that are better at competing, better at delivering great value for customer, well, they're always going to have a little bit of an edge. Although honestly, I'm not sure if I'd want to have somebody come to my home and cut my hair, but my colleagues seem to enjoy that experience very much. All right, we'll move on to the next. So another aspect of the new normal is just this concept of work-life balance. And so some people, it's very important for them to have a demarcation. This is my work life, and this is my personal life, and I want to be able to stop working at a certain time. But what happened is during the era of the new normal and COVID, as people moved to more work from home, you're getting text messages, or you're getting emails, or you're getting chat messages, all day. And if you have colleagues working in other parts of the world, you may be getting those messages when you normally would be asleep. So long hours seated in front of non-ergonomic furniture has also created a situation where some people are having some neck related injuries, or their eyesight is getting worse, their shoulders are hurting, their back is hurting. Some people have gained weight or obesity has increased. And so, that's an unfortunate aspect, is people felt afraid to go outside, afraid to interact with others. They just stayed home. They ordered food. They couldn't exercise a lot. Maybe that when you're eating a lot of food from restaurants, your portions are larger. And then the time, right? As I mentioned before, if previously you've been used to working in the office, you went to the office at 9 o'clock in the morning, you left at 7, 6, 5, whatever. But now you're working like, 14-hour days, 16-hour days from the time you wake up until you go to sleep. There's all kinds of messages coming in. Some people feel like they have less family time. And an alarming trend is we're seeing in organizations, it might be as often as 1 employee out of 4 suddenly resigns. And partially because it's hard to find other good people, no replacement is hired. And so the work of that person is just redistributed to the remaining workers. So I'd love to hear, what approaches have you found, or have you heard of good approaches to maintaining some kind of work-life balance during this era of the new normal? Elizabeth, I'd love to hear from you if you have found any good ways to sort of strike that work-life balance.
I mean, for me personally, as well as for the clients that I talk to, I feel like actually a lot of things that you're talking about is something that was already happening before even COVID. Because, for example, a lot of the international companies who have global organizations, you're doing 24 hours anyway. And so we were hearing these complaints even beforehand. And obviously, because I, practice law, employment law is my area, what that raises in different jurisdictions is, okay, how does that impact working hour legislation in different areas, things like that. So these aren't issues that are new because of COVID. They were already sort of happening because of the globalization of the workforce. And some of the sort of, I guess, resolutions or remedies that companies and were already looking at even before was really trying to find ways to, first of all, better communicate. And I think we've mentioned this in some of the other sections as well, is how much more communication is really becoming more important, because before you would have these other cues. For example, if you're working in person, you would have body language cues, you would have visual cues, things like that no longer may be present anymore, right? So the purposeful communication that you have, intentionally making time to have Zoom calls or whatever, that's, I think, become even more important than ever before. Even for me personally, when I work with my juniors, and I would see personally, if they come in ragged or tired, then I'd be able to adjust sort of my working style. If I see that they're in a room and they're not volunteering, then I either will, help them bring forth their idea more purposefully or not. Things like that is something, again, those cues no longer are apparent. So I will have to make time to reach out to them one-on-one to try to make those times. And also in terms of the work-life balance, again, something that existed before, companies are having to find ways around. Okay, we make sure that people acknowledge that different time zones have different needs. And so you have to be purposeful in terms of when you set up meetings. Again, it's nothing new because of COVID, but it's just something that has become more urgent because of COVID, I feel like. And so, again, I haven't found any great ideas. My clients, they come to me with the same issues in terms of, okay, how does this then also impact from a legal perspective? And, again, different jurisdictions have different legal requirements with regard to working hours and things like that. And so you have to be mindful of how you sort of fit that into whatever new plan that you're working on. But I think at the end of the day, it comes down to being able to openly and often communicate with your teams to be able to find that right balance and needs that meet your organizational needs.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That's wonderful. And in fact, that sort of balancing act for employers of helping their employees to have that work-life balance while meeting regulatory requirements. Always a challenge. So we're going to move forward because we're starting to run short on time. We're at 4:16. And I do want to respect all of your time. So one of the things we previously talked about, especially in Korea, team dynamics and bonding. It was often the case that you did have face-to-face meetings, we have 회식 with your colleagues, and that's not really been happening. And some employees don't want that to come back. One of the things that has come to light is some research, not all, but some research has seemed to suggest that people are more creative. The quality of creative ideas generated in a face-to-face meeting is a little bit better than the quality of ideas generated when you're working virtually. And this can affect problem solving and innovation. The other unfortunate aspect is research seems to show that while people are working distributed, they're seeking help and they're off. And this can also be a little bit challenging for team bonding and team synergy. And another aspect is that a lot of employees, fresh graduates who've been hired in the years 2021 and 2022, they've actually never yet met their team members face-to-face. They've been working virtually from the very beginning of their time until now. So all of these things can have an impact on sort of the team bonding. And I'd just be curious to know if anybody, so we know that this is a challenge, just curious if anybody has found a way to sort of help your teams bond in this new normal. And there may not be, the most effective ways. One suggestion that has been made is if you have a hybrid work environment where your employees are working from home part of the time and coming into an office part of the time, the suggestion has been made that don't use that time in office for reports and things that could easily be done while they're working from home. Because in-group collaboration is more effective face-to-face, the idea is use those times when people are in the office together to schedule those face-to-face sort of brainstorming sessions or those collaboration sessions. And it's usually going to have a little bit better impact versus those situations where you're just, working distributed. I just want to touch on one last thing before we get there. We're going to skip over this projects one because we're running short on time. I wanted to talk about the impact on people managers. So people managers in this new normal, a big challenge is hiring talent, developing that talent, and retaining talent, especially retention. Retention has been a huge challenge for many organizations during this new normal. And in a talent war, that's only expected to increase. So one of the things about hiring is, resumes look a little bit different. Your interviewing is not necessarily face-to-face. A lot of times you're interviewing people just by Zoom or by Teams. The other challenge is that restrictions on travel. So if you've been an employer who is hiring more international talent, well, that becomes a little bit more challenging when there are restrictions about people being able to move cross-border. Some of those restrictions are going away. But a big challenge is some organizations have been very slow at hiring. And so by the time they make a decision in a talent war, if you wait too long, the person you're interviewing might just have moved on to another company. And then in terms of developing talent, it's always the challenge of cross-skilling and upskilling or reskilling your people, getting your people to learn the things that they need to, because sometimes you're not able to hire the outside talent that you're looking for. So you develop your internal people, but it's easier to train them when they're working together, especially for apprenticeship type work. The younger people can learn when they're working in the same space as somebody who's experienced. But when you're distributed, when all your work arrangements are virtual, it's a little bit harder to do that knowledge sharing. And then in terms of retaining talent, definitely we have what's called in the West, we're going through a period of what's called the Great Resignation. Lots of employees are leaving their organization. Maybe COVID has made them rethink their priorities, or maybe just they have very highly in demand technical skills or sales skills. But, you know, we hear lots of organizations struggle to retain their best workers. So I'd love to hear if anybody has come up with or found good ways of maintaining strong relationships with their talent, whether it be hiring talent, developing it, or retaining that talent. Maybe I can ask. Oh, yes.
I was just wondering. Yeah, this is me, Elizabeth. I had heard that other organizations use things like, you know, what we would normally have done in person before through Zoom. Like they will have, you know, drink nights or a movie night where people watch either in their respective locations while they're, you know, discussing during Zoom. I have not personally found this to be very useful. And I'm just wondering if anybody else here has found that sort of, you know, organization or that sort of activity to be useful in any way.
So is anybody, you know, as Elizabeth just raised, anybody find creative uses of Zoom that worked, where employees really enjoyed that sort of virtual bonding?
Well, to my knowledge, you know, I mean, the virtual socializing is not working that well. And the people in nature, I mean, what the younger generation particularly likes with this COVID situation is, you know, they do not have this kind of a socialization, I mean, socializing over virtual world, so that they can have more, you know, their own private time. So actually the mindset, the frame, I think we are really getting into new normal, because I mean, you know, the way we think about this socializing engagement is very much traditional. And
so maybe you're saying that we don't need to think about having them bond together. Maybe they're okay bonding alone.
Bonding is important, because I mean that also boosts the commitment of the individuals, you know, I mean, loyalty to the organization, which is very critical. But I think we should think some clever way rather than the traditional approach, like, you know, the virtual drinking or virtual chatting. Yeah. Because,
so you have not found that to work either, right? I have not found that. For example, I will order pizza for everybody to their respective locations. And so we will all be eating the same thing and, you know, like pop a drink, whatever you want. But still, that interaction through Zoom, even if I've ordered pizza for everybody, it has not worked for me. So I'm just wondering if it worked for anybody else.
My thought is it doesn't work. You know, from my experience, from what I heard from other people, it doesn't work. It doesn't work as the way it's intended. So
I think this is something where nobody's found the right answer. There's some approaches that are better, some approaches that are not so strong. It's an interesting thing that in Korea, Hwaeshik was such a strong aspect, and clearly there are a large number of younger Koreans who don't want to participate in Hwaeshik. And I see articles, and I've heard from younger friends of mine that's the part that they're least looking forward to, is Korea sort of returns to normal. And so I think it will be a challenge for organizations to figure out. One last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up today. As people are working from home more, and my expectation is that the new normal work from home will still be an integral part. You may not be working from home all the time, but you will be working from home more than before COVID. A big change is the distractions of working from home. So for the purposes of this conversation, I just want to focus on what's on the right-hand side. So when people are working from home, some people really love it, but others don't like it. And especially they don't like it if they feel like when I'm working from home, there's a lot of noise and the noise is distracting me. The noise could come from pets. The noise could come from domestic activities. Sometimes there's a lot of construction around the area where I live. So sometimes when I'm on a Zoom call, the other people could hear that noise. Then the other thing is, particularly if you have family members at home, if you have children, we may have all seen that famous video where there was this guy talking on TV and his little kid ran into the room, and it's so funny. So family demand a big distraction. Some people, they're addicted to online shopping. So when they're in the office, they can't shop too much because other people see them. But at home, they can be shopping all day. And other people are very much addicted to social media. Other people are addicted to YouTube videos, right? If you're watching YouTube videos all day at your office, somebody might say something to you. But if you're at home, there's nothing to stop you from watching YouTube videos all day. Or if you love to play computer games, the computer gaming industry is much bigger than the film industry. Lots of people play games, but there's a time and place, and some people get addicted. And then, especially for women, we hear a lot that they have challenges because, still to this day, women have much more responsibility, both for domestic, taking care of kids, taking care of the home, sometimes cooking meals, cleaning, as well as doing their work. So if you're a working mother, it's quite challenging and it can be quite distracting because you got too much going on. And so working from home sometimes is considered a blessing for women, but on the other hand, some women are saying it's really distracting and I can't really get much done because I have other things I have to do as well. So all of these things are big distractions, discomfort sometimes from working from home. And the real question is, what has anybody found something, given that people have been working from home for the past couple of years during COVID? Have you found any good ways to sort of reduce the discomfort to make working from home more effective or more productive? Some people prefer working from home. Some people actually prefer working in the office for these reasons. And maybe I can ask, so Hankyo, you were saying earlier, your organization has become quite effective at virtual work, but just curious, do you find working from home to be distracting?
It can be quite distracting. I think when I first started working from home, I think from that list, 3 or 4 apply to me. And I also have a very noisy cat who live with me, so I can be also embarrassing / distracting when I'm on a client calling and so forth. So I think these, as a term or expression, new normal suggests, I think to a certain extent we just have to learn to deal with it. And I see this set of distractions as something that's very similar to dealing with being distracted at work by coworkers wanting to have water cooler chats, or having to go to Peshik and having to step out early for different meetings that get called last minute, and so on and so forth. So as we go into this new culture of working remotely, these are the things that can be mitigated to a certain point, but also we just have to learn how to deal with.
There you go. So adapting to the new normal is the whole aim of today's session. That brings us to the end of today. I just want to remind you again, this is just one part of a normally half-day session, and the second part would discuss a lot more about coping strategies for the new normal. I thank you guys all so much for taking aside your time to join me today. I hope that you found the conversation helpful. Clearly it strikes me that nobody has got the right solutions. We're still very much adapting to the new normal, and we don't know we don't know exactly what the new normal is even going to look like, if there's still going to be a lot more working from home, or people are all going to start going back to the office. I think the jury's out on that. But I think what's important is the idea that the new normal clearly is changing the way that we work. And hopefully we all are form a community where we're willing to share best practice and, the things that are working, the things that make it just a little bit better. But clearly there's a lot more work to do. So it's been my pleasure to present to you today. Thank you so much for your time.